Thank you for joining us for this afternoon's webinar titled Making Grassroots Advocacy Work for You. My name is Jonathan Payne, and I am the President of the National Lumber and Building Material Dealers Association. Before we begin, I want to go over a couple of items. All participants are in listen mode only, and to ask questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box located within the control panel that you should see to your right. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a very brief online survey, and upon your completion, you will receive a copy of today's webinar. This webinar is also being recorded. Now, to make sure everyone is listening and knows where the question box is, I ask that you let us know where you are calling from by typing in your city and state. I will give everyone a couple minutes to do that now, so please go ahead and type in the city and state that you're calling in from in the question box. All right, we have Arkansas on. Denver, Washington, D.C., and again, just go ahead and type in your city and state in the question box. That's where you're going to be able to communicate with us during the webinar presentation. All right, California, thank you. New York, Kentucky. All right, well, thanks everybody. At this time, I would like to introduce Ben Gann, NLBMDA's Vice President of Legislative and Political Affairs. Ben, you want to take it?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Frank Moore, our regulatory counsel, is here as well, but I'm going to be captaining this ship. I just want to thank everyone, first of all, for taking time out of their schedule to learn more about how NLBMDA is helping dealers and regional associations reach out and communicate better with their federal lawmakers. We're going to discuss three main areas related to grassroots during this webinar. First, we'll focus on why grassroots is necessary and important as part of an overall advocacy program. Next, we'll cover the ways NLBMDA members and regional association executives can stay about the issues. And then finally, we'll go over the variety of ways that NLBMDA members can engage and interact with their members of Congress. So let's dive right into it. The first section will focus on why grassroots is an important and essential part of a successful program for any association advocacy program, especially one like NLBMDA's, which represents over 5,000 yards nationwide. So there's 5 parts we're going to cover in this section. The first, just going over what exactly grassroots means in the context of how it relates to NLBMDA. Second, common excuses or reasons members choose not to engage with their members of Congress. Third, explaining the importance of grassroots involvement as part of the overall advocacy strategy. Fourth, explaining why NLBMDA members need to take action. And then fifth, just briefly explaining why grassroots advocacy is so effective. So first, what is grassroots exactly as it pertains to NLBMDA? Well, for NLBMDA, it means their members are communicating with their members of Congress and their staff on issues of importance to the lumber and building material industry. I'm not going to spend a lot of time today talking about specific legislative issues, but some of the items we're focused on right now are things like the Department of Labor overtime rule that changes employees eligible for overtime pay, legal reform and the Innocent Sellers Fairness Act, which reduced the instances where dealers are subject to unfair and unfounded lawsuits. There's healthcare legislation such as the health insurance tax repeal, which came into effect as part of Obamacare and disproportionately affects small and medium companies. We continue to work on and talk to the Hill about regulatory reform to cut red tape and reduce the regulatory burden for small businesses. And then something that's pretty active right now, but cost-effective building codes. There's a provision in the broader energy bills that are being negotiated between the House and Senate that we're looking that make sure that it's technology neutral, transparent, and that it's cost effective, meaning that it doesn't take 30 years to receive a payback period. So what are some common reasons why people don't engage in grassroots advocacy? So I think the main reason, maybe one of the main reasons is, right, we already have staff at NLBMDA that does this. So Jonathan, myself, Frank, more on the regulatory side, but we're all engaged on this every day. So why is it that you guys need to be involved? Well, you know, the fact of the matter is, even though our roles within the association are important, your role in this is important as well. So in order for us to have a very effective advocacy program, Grassroots is a piece of it. For some, obviously, you're running businesses, so time is a factor and you might be too busy. So another one might be you don't know where to start. So part of what this webinar is about is showing you all the tools that NLBMDA has available for you to make it as easy as possible to communicate with your members of Congress. For those of us that may be a little bit more pessimistic about Washington, there is the sentiment that nothing is going to pass. But as has been mentioned a time or two, these things are often take more than 1 year or one Congress to pass. And so continued effort on it is required. The last is other groups are doing this. So there are already obviously bigger groups than NLBMDA, such as the U.S. Chamber, National Association of Home Builders, that are covering a lot of the issues that we focus on as well. So some feel it's duplicative and not needed. But we're going to go over today why that you shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah, and I just would mention that this is not unique to our association in terms of the excuses that or the reasons why folks don't get involved. I mean, we see this in other associations as well. So, right, we're not saying, hey, you guys, we recognize that there are some issues, and let's try to make this as easy as possible for folks to get engaged.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Frank, that this is not a unique issue to NLBMDA. This is an issue that even large associations face in engaging with and getting their members active on it. Yeah. So why is it important? Understanding all of the reasons I just gave for why people choose not to get involved, here's why it is important. So Congress, the White House, which includes agencies such as the Department of Labor and EPA, are constantly making decisions that will affect the lumber and building material industry. So given that, we really need to have not just lobbyists or regulatory counsel, but also our members speaking with the people who will make the decisions. And the other issue is that by not getting involved, that's a choice as well, and that we're letting other people make decisions that could have a dramatic effect on your business. Congressional offices, it's important to point out, want to hear from our members, from members like ours. So especially ones that create jobs, pay taxes, they want to hear from you because you have an expertise in what it takes to be successful in the current legislative and regulatory climate. And then, as I mentioned earlier, even though we have staff in Washington, D.C. to go to the Hill, speak with regulatory bodies, it's still not a replacement for constituent relationships. So the way we think about an effective grassroots advocacy program is it has three parts. There's a three-legged stool. There's lobbying, which I do, and Jonathan does sometimes. There's the Pact, the Political Action Committee, which makes contributions to candidate committees. But then Grassroots is also a vital part of that overall advocacy program. And perhaps most importantly, we want to make things happen. So you see on your screen, there's a quote from Tommy Lasorda, the Hall of Fame baseball manager for the Los Angeles Dodgers, who said there are three kinds of people: the people who make it happen, people who watch what happens, and people who wonder what happened. And obviously, the point of the quote is to hammer home that we want our members to be proactive and engaging with their lawmakers before something becomes an issue, because it's always going to be easier to affect the outcome in a way that's favorable for NLBMDA if we're already speaking to members of Congress. So, right, we've kind of gone over what it, kind of why we need to do it. So why does it work? Okay, well, I think at its most basic level, we're dealing with elected officials here, and they want to be reelected. And so in the case of our House members who are elected every 2 years, our president every 4 years, our senators every 6 years, you decide whether they keep their jobs or not. If you feel they aren't doing a good job, you can always vote for somebody else the next time they're on the ballot. And it's not just you who has a vote. It's also important to keep in mind your employees and their families as well have a vote. So it's not just about you and your one vote, which is very important, but if you think about how many people you employ within your organization or how many dealers are within your area, think about what kind of impact that could have. So as I mentioned, politicians are pragmatic creatures usually, and they're always thinking about how their actions will impact the reelection. So as I like to say, many times with lawmakers, it's about jobs and votes. So to the extent where NLBMDA members are employing people and those people are getting to the polls, that has an important effect on their behavior. As NLBMDA member Walter Foxworth has said to me a time or two, this is all cumulative. It's cumulative. So if you go in once and meet with your member of Congress or their staff, you'll begin to develop that relationship. But the real benefits from that relationship come from repeatedly contacting them, calling them, visiting with them, even when there isn't necessarily something of incredible importance that's about to be considered in the House or the Senate. And then if you're active and engaged, as we've mentioned, elected officials are more likely to listen to you. So congressional offices want to hear from people they think are informed and are active in their communities. And so if you are active, if you do seem informed and are informed on the issues, they're more likely to come to you when there's an issue or there's something if it's regulatory like the overtime rule, or it's something legislative, they might ask for your opinion about what it would mean for your business.
So that is so key though. I mean, once we sort of establish our bona fides as an individual member of NLBMDA, certainly as an organization, but so we become, as you're saying, Ben, sort of that source of information that the elected officials can rely on. And then, they want to know who they can turn to and get some guidance and just bounce off, hey, what do you think about this? How will it affect your sector? So I think that's just so key and should be a welcoming sort of call for us to be involved. There's a role for us to play, and I think the members of Congress really look to us for sources of information. So I think that's worth reemphasizing.
No, those are good points, Frank. So that's the next section. So we've covered why Grassroots is important and established the need for it within an advocacy program. But people on the call here, they all have full-time jobs. They're not spending every minute of the workday monitoring legislation and regulations. So what are simple ways to stay informed on the issues? Well, first, we're going to cover several of NLBMDA's policy priorities. Next, there are some easy ways to keep up to date that do not require you to look all over the internet. Third, you can be knowledgeable without being a policy expert. Fourth, I think it's important to know where your individual lawmakers stand on the issues NLBMDA cares about. So that's 4 and 5. And then 6, it's not something we've discussed a lot in the past here in NLBMDA, but making sure that your employees are engaged and voting on election day and are registered to vote. So I already mentioned this, but in the last section, so I don't want to go over it in detail again, but there are some of the issues NLBMDA is working on: overtime rule, building codes language in the comprehensive energy bill. Broadly speaking, healthcare reform. We did a policy survey 2 years ago with our members, and they said the #1 issue affecting their business is healthcare and healthcare costs. So whether it's the HIT repeal bill, some other things we're working on related to some of the requirements in Obamacare, the overall regulatory reform and reducing the burden on small businesses, and of course legal reform, most importantly with the Innocent Sellers Fairness Act. So, okay, we've covered what some of the issues NLBMDA is working on, but you still might need to do a little research. So what can you do that won't require you to look all over the place? Well, first, if you go to our Grassroots action page, so we're going to walk through this in a little bit, but if you go to the homepage at dealer.org and you go to the advocacy drop-down menu, there should be a heading called 2016 Recess Action Center. And if you go there, it's going to have some information for you to set up meetings during the long congressional recess. It'll have talking points on some of the issues NLBMDA is working on. It'll have a flyer for GOTV and getting your employees to register to vote. So there's a lot of good stuff there. If you decide you want to do a lumberyard visit, it has a how-to guide in setting up who to contact, how to go about publicizing it, and then communicating and sharing that information with us, and then also your regional association executive. So in addition to that, on the Research Action page, we have an e-update that goes out every 2 weeks. It has a lot of information about the status of certain pieces of legislation we're tracking, or regulations that are developing, or depending on what stage they're in. And then also there's a workplace safety update that Frank does every month that has, some of it's very obvious, like the overtime rule, and then trucking regulations if you own a fleet. So there's things like that you can become informed on as well. In addition, there's our national policy agenda. So we publish that annually. It is updated each year by our legislative advocacy committee, and so making sure that our policy priorities are up to date and in keeping with the political, legislative, and regulatory climate. So, and then beyond all that, if you're not sure about something, an issue, if there's an issue I didn't mention, or you just can't find information on anywhere, you can always contact me, you can always contact Frank, and we're happy to find that information for you. Yeah. So I think the most important thing in terms of encouraging people to meet with their members of Congress and engage them is you don't have to be a policy expert. You don't have to be a policy wonk to be good, to be an effective advocate for the issues that NLBMDA and you care about. So as I would say, knowing the basics of an issue is enough. If you know 3 talking points, you know the bill number, you know the status of it, and 2 or 3 things the bill seeks to accomplish, that's good enough. That you don't need to be know the ins and outs of any bill. So in addition to knowing the basics, I think it's really important, probably more important, because I can always go into an Hill office and tell you what a bill, tell the staff what a bill will do, but it's really important for you to tell your personal story. So congressional offices really are more interested in hearing how legislation and regulations affect you and your business than they are hearing a bunch of talking points that they probably are going to hear for the 4th or 5th time. Yeah. So I think it's also really important to keep in mind that even if you don't think of yourself as an expert, you are, in the sense that you're running a successful business and you've probably been working in the lumber and building material industry a while. And so that does make you an expert. It makes you an expert on running a business successfully in a challenging legislative and regulatory climate, and having spent years in the LBM industry, you have an idea of how a piece of legislation or regulation, or how a regulation is going to affect the industry you work in.
This I think is so important, and also, and for those on the call, as you're talking to your colleagues, other dealers, you know, this sort of helps break that ice. You don't have to be that policy expert. This is not going to be something that's beyond what you're going to be comfortable with. Your comfort space is what you do on a daily basis, and I mean that is actually the power that Grassroots, I think, brings to what Ben and Jonathan do on the Hill as a staff here, is that this was part of one of those extra legs to the stool that Ben referenced earlier. So I just think this is so important, and it also is a good point to make to folks who may be hesitant in getting involved. And look, you know, this really is, you know, you're here to tell the story of the LBM sector and how you're operating back home. So anyway, enough of that, but I think it's so important.
No, those are great points, Frank. So I think the next thing I want to talk to them about is how do you know where your lawmakers stand? So I'm going to walk you guys through it in a second, but as I've mentioned, it's really easy to find their vote score, to find where they stand on the issue. So I'm going to get out of my slides here for a second, and I'm going to pull up the internet. So if we're on dealer.org, if I go to advocacy and then go to Legislative Action Center and I click on that, okay, the Legislative Action Center pops up, and then I can look for any lawmaker and see what their vote score is. So I'm going to type in Mike Kaufman, who's a congressman from Colorado, who our Mountain States Association has a good relationship with, and I'll just click on his name, and it should pop up. It'll just take a second. Hold on. Okay. Just bear with me a second. Okay, here we go. So as you can see here, Mike Kaufman, NLBMDA 95% of the time. So if you scroll down, it has a list of all the votes that make up the vote score. And that gives you an idea of, okay, this is where he is, what issue didn't he agree with us on. But let's be reasonable, 95% is pretty darn good, so there's no reason to weep about it too much. So let's go back into the back to our slides. So,
and Ben,
go ahead.
Just a couple things. Just want to remind everybody you can enter in any questions at any time in your question box. So now would be a good time to do that. But real quick, can you just explain how the score is tabulated? How's that 95% or that number come about?
Sure. So there are a range of issues that Congress votes on, and so over the course of the legislative, over each Congress, so that's a 2-year period that started. So for the current one, it started at the beginning of 2015 up till now. So there, I believe, 23 votes for the House. I might be a little off on that. 21 to 23 votes in the House, and there are 8 votes that make up the vote score in the Senate. The Senate always has fewer votes, so the score is always a little bit more erratic. So you might see your senator and think he's very good with us on the issues, and they might be, but they might have a 75% vote score. Exactly. I think this is where I just mentioned the vote score is meant to be sort of helpful, but it's not a precise tool. Okay, so just because a member of Congress, so if you look at your screen, Brad Ashford, who's a Democratic congressman from Nebraska, the Omaha area, he agrees with us 76% of the time, which is pretty good, but he's one of 2 House Democrats who've been outspoken against the Department of Labor's overtime rule. So I think what I'm trying to illustrate here is even though somebody might not have a perfect score or near perfect score with us, we still might be very interested in cultivating their continued support because they're one of our champions on a specific issue.
Now, that score is based on particular issues impacting our industry.
Yeah, so I think for the House, they always do, especially, they do a lot of regulatory reform bills. So if there's a regulatory reform bill, and they've voted on it, it's in the vote score. So there's things like that, but there's, occasionally things like a highway bill that sneak their way because we're just generally supportive of more funding. The energy bill, COSCA reform, which just got signed in the law. So there's some things like that as well that we support that maybe aren't top tier issues for us, but they all make up part of that vote score.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So part of staying informed is making sure you and your employees are able to vote on Election Day. So at the Legislative Action Center, you can find links for voter registration and your polling location. So we usually think about the general election in November, but keep in mind that a few states still have primaries. Florida is a good example. They have a Senate primary down there where, depending on who the Democratic nominee is, it could affect how competitive that race is because Marco Rubio has just jumped back into that race. And so obviously a lot of primaries have already happened, but not all of them. So just keep that in mind. We also are trying to make this easier for your employees to go through our site. But keep in mind of voter registration deadlines in your state. So every state's a little bit different in terms of when you have to be registered. Some it's 30 days in advance. Some it's a little bit more than that. So I'm going to just show you how easy this is for you guys to get people at your company to register to vote if they haven't been. So if we're on the homepage for a Legislative Action Center, there's a register to vote, and this is through a organization called Turbo Vote. So it's a nonprofit that mostly works with colleges and universities and nonprofits, but they do work with associations such as the National Association of Manufacturers to just encourage increased voter participation. So if I click on the link, you'll see turbovote.org pops up. And if I can click Get Started, I'm not going to fill this out, but I can fill out my name, you go through it, and it does all of that for the individual. And that individual can also sign up for text alerts so it reminds them when the election is going to take place. And the good news as an employer is you're not liable for anything. So there's always that tension of if I'm encouraging my employees to register to vote and vote on Election Day, which is perfectly legal, that I'm not going over that line and advocating for one candidate over another. We want to be very mindful of that. So if you use a third-party site like that, you're not liable for anything.
Ben, that actually ties into a question that we have is that are there any restrictions from as an employer to employee? It's great to encourage your employees to vote, but can I tell them who to vote for, or can I say as a company we encourage you to vote? What are the restrictions around
Sure.
that, if any?
No. So there are restrictions. So there is nothing. It is perfectly legal for you to encourage people to vote, and if they aren't registered to vote, to please register to vote. That is incredible. That there's nothing wrong with that. Where you can get into some trouble is if you start saying, well, I like this guy, you should vote for this person for Senate over that person. You need to avoid that. Now, if you host a member of Congress at your lumberyard, they might have a pretty good idea of who you support, but that's not, that is legal, right? So it's okay to have them visit your lumberyard, but if you then say, they leave and then the next day you say, and you all better vote for them on Election Day, you can't do that. That second part you can't do. The first part is absolutely fine, but that second part you want to stay away from. I should also point out, so they've done a lot of studies, like nonpartisan studies, and employees really do listen to their employers when it comes to getting out to vote, and to some degree taking cues from their employers over who to vote for. Because, I mean, look, we all at some level are pragmatic creatures, and if, hey, it's more likely the business is going to do well if one person's elected versus another person's elected, well, people understand that pretty easily.
I think one good point you made is those yard visits that I know you'll get to those shortly, of having a member of Congress who obviously is in sync with us visit your yard and get some visibility with the men and women that work there. I think that's key. So I just would, I think that's a great opportunity to sort of combine the getting the vote with the policy that we're really leaning towards.
No, that's a good point. So I think ideally what we want to be able to do here is allow you in your own unique way, create a culture of political action at your lumberyard by encouraging and reminding your employees to vote. So one of the things we've done here is on the recess action page, there's a flyer. It's a PDF. You can just click on the link, you'll download it, and you can print it out and put it up in your break room and just remind people that Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. And that's all it is. Again, you're just encouraging people to vote. But and it's a pretty simple poster too, so you don't need special paper. You can print it out on 8.5 by 11 paper, put it on the cork board in your break room, and there you go. Okay, so we've established about why grassroots is important, about staying informed on the issues. So now the third part of this is what are the best ways to engage your lawmakers on the issues. So there's really three basic ways. One is through standard messages, some of which you can do through our Legislative Action Center. The second is through more personalized message, which is a bit higher touch, but which requires more work on your part, but it's certainly doable. And then the third way is just in-person meetings, and those can take a variety of forms. So we're going to go through the different ways and different varieties of in-person meetings. And then finally, the meetings and the messages are very helpful, but ultimately, right, we want to make sure that you guys are helping, that you're able to maintain the relationship with your lawmakers moving forward. So as mentioned, there are three basic ways of engaging lawmakers. So the first, through standard messages like the ones found on the Legislative Action Center. Second, are more personalized messages, usually addressed to either the lawmaker or a specific staff person in the congressional office who handles a specific issue. And then third, in-person meetings, which can take a variety of forms and happen in a variety of settings. So let's start with standard messages. The first are letters are essentially electronic messages to congressional offices. If you go to, we'll go look at it in a minute, but if you go to our Legislative Action Center, you'll see at the top there's write a letter and then send a tweet for you to contact your lawmakers. And they're standard messages. You can edit them. So let's just take a look at them. Let's go to our site. So, okay, let's go to the top. And we'll start with write a letter. So this is on the overtime rule. I can just click take action. It pops up. These are my lawmakers, right? This is who I am. Please don't come to my house this evening. But, and I can just click submit. Okay, so, I need a prefix. So just Mr. Okay. And then click submit. Gotta type my name, sorry. So, and then this is an easy way. So this is kind of a standard form email message that gets sent to congressional staff on a particular issue. And then I can also send tweets. So if you do have a Twitter account, you can always send a tweet. There's a variety of a number of issues where you can do that. And then you can just hit send a tweet. This will take, it usually takes a second to pop up here. So this is another way when we're looking at social media to engage with members of Congress and their staff. We want to, you know, obviously the standard electronic message is fine, but we also want to look for new ways of communicating with our member.
And I think people will be really surprised to hear how active some members of Congress are on Twitter.
Yeah, so there have been, that's a good point, Jonathan. So I'm just going to send all here, and so as you can see, it populates. So for my member of Congress or my senator, it has their Twitter handle, so at Jerry Conley, at Mark Warner, and then support of the overtime rule reform bill, and you can just hit send all, boom, and now I'm done. So there are a variety of ways to do this, and studies have shown that congressional offices are most active on Twitter. So it is a really good way, and they are monitoring it regularly throughout the day. So let's go back to our slides. And another way via social media that we can contact our members of Congress is through Facebook. Now, just because of the way our software works, we're not able to connect you straight through the Legislative Action Center to a member of to the Lawmakers Facebook page, but I'm going to show you in a minute that it's not that hard to do. So why don't we take a look at what the easiest way to do that. So if like Mike Kaufman's a good example. So let's just use Mike Kaufman here. It's, as you can see here, in addition to having his vote score and some basic bio information, it also has his Facebook address. So I don't have him pulled up, but I do have Chuck Grassley pulled up here. So as you can see right here, there's a message button. You can click on that message and type in, you know, a standard message to him via Facebook. I will point out that not every member of Congress allows you to send them a message via Facebook. Many, if not all, do have a Facebook page, but they don't always allow you to send them messages just to deal with, I think, some degree for spam, some degree just to manage the inflow of incoming messages. So we've talked about sort of standard ways we can contact members of Congress, but what are some more higher touch personalized ways we can do that? So one way is emailing a specific congressional staff person on an issue. If you're not sure who handles a certain issue, like if it pertains to the overtime rule, you're going to want to speak to the staff person who handles workforce issues, or if it's something dealing with EPA, you're going to want to speak with the person or contact the person who is handling environmental issues. So if you don't know who that person is, there's really two ways to do it. You can always contact the congressional office and ask, and they might tell you. Sometimes they won't. If they don't, you can always contact me, and I can always find out that information for you if I don't have it. The other way of going to being hyper-personalized with our message is to send a handwritten letter to a local office. It's important that, why a handwritten letter? Well, if you just do a typed letter, it's just going to get thrown on the stack of all the other typed letters, and nobody's really going to take a look at it. If you send a handwritten letter, somebody has to open it. A staff person has to read it, because you can't just scan it and figure out what was being said. But keep in mind, it's really important that that goes to a local office. So if you send it to Washington, D.C., it has to be irradiated. They don't receive it for a few weeks. Yeah. That's really not the best way of personalizing your communication. It's much better if you send it to one of your local offices. And when we were looking at just a second ago with Mike Kaufman, if you go to those individual lawmaker pages, why don't I just show you real fast? It's going to have the information of where you can send a letter or their contact information. So, Mike Kaufman has a local office in Aurora, Colorado. It has the phone, it has the mailing address, it has the phone number, it has the fax number. So if you wanted to fax it over and mail a copy, you could do that. But it's very straightforward. And if they have 5 offices, like their Senate office, it's going to have all 5 offices with the address, the phone number, the fax number. So that's all stuff you can find out by just going to the Legislative Action Center. You don't have to type a bunch of stuff into Google to find this information. So
I do like
go ahead.
Just the fact that, just to emphasize again, the contacting staff, and as a former staff, not to think that I was important at that time, but these are the young men and women, for the most part, who really know the issues, and the member of Congress really does sit down and talk with those young men and women about the issues they're covering. So in terms of creating those personal relationships, certainly we want them at the member level, but don't discount the relationships you can build with those staff people. And I know when I was on the Hill going around with the chairman of my committee on some issues, I mean, you'd be talking to a constituent and say, well, give Frank a call. We didn't have email at that time. Give Frank a call. But that is so important. And I know we're going to be talking about the legislative conference and coming to the Hill. You're going to meet those staff people. They're going to be in there too. It's covering some of those issues. So it's so key to really nourish those opportunities at that level as well.
Yeah, and I would just say, Frank, in addition to that when members of Congress are asking whether they should support or sign on to a bill, one of the things they ask is, well, have we heard from anybody in our district about this?
They're asking that staff person, have we heard from anyone? Exactly.
Okay, so in addition, so now the highest touch is really the in-person meeting. So we're going to start with just talking about in-person meetings in Washington, D.C., and then we're going to get to the different ways you can meet with your lawmakers and their staff back home. So first, with the Legislative Conference in Washington, D.C., NLBMDA does this event every spring. So if you have a dealer has never been to the Legislative Conference, it's especially good for those folks because you get to see how a congressional office really works. I think if you've never been here, you get the sense that it's this real really important, really complicated operation. And really, right, especially on the House side, it's small offices, young staff. And so really, I think it gives you a better idea of how Washington works. Obviously, you get to meet with your lawmakers and their staff. The benefit for you and for them is it allows them to put a name and a face with an issue. So they might have seen your letter on the overtime rule, but now they understand, oh, okay, that's who they are. Okay, right, they operate 2 lumber yards in my district. They employ this many people, and this is how it would affect them. The one drawback to D.C., to doing the meetings in D.C., even though they are very helpful, is you do not have maybe as much time as you would back home. So, usually you have, 15, 20 minutes, and then for them, it's on to the next meeting, or they're doing votes, or they have a hearing to go to. But it is a very good opportunity. Trust me, especially if you're from a smaller state, people are so excited to see somebody from their state. Max Baucus, the former senator from Montana, if anybody from Montana would come into that office, he would drop everything he was doing and come and say hi to them. Because it's a big deal, right, that you're out there.
And just to add, I think that's what you said is so important, why it's so important if you do come to D.C. and you do come to the legislative conference and you do meet for, 15 minutes, so important to continue building that relationship back in the districts in spending that additional time back in the districts, right, Ben? Because you, just like you just said, you probably will have less time here in DC, and you'll have a greater amount of time probably interacting with the district office as well, especially during the recess, which we're going to get into.
Right. I mean, I think of it kind of as like 3 steps, right? In the first 4 months of the year, obviously expense is an issue, but if not you, somebody from your federated association at a minimum can come to the legislative conference. Then the second part, in the middle 4 months of the year, trying to meet with them back in the district, and then in the last third of the year, going and voting, right? So it's one to ABC. It's not, doesn't have to be super complicated. So just a quick plug for the next year's legislative conference. It's being held March 27th through 29th here in Washington, D.C. We'd love to see you. So just think about it this way. There's going to be certainly a new president. We don't know what the balance of power in Congress is going to be. So there really could be a paradigm shift in the issues that the Hill is considering and working on, and a good opportunity at an early stage in that process to come and weigh in. So now let's get into in-person meetings. So, there are a couple different ways you can do that. The first and probably most effective is to have them visit your lumberyard. The second is you can always go to them if they can't come to you by meeting at one of their local offices. Third, there are public events such as town halls, not exclusively town halls, but town halls. Sometimes they have mobile offices where they travel around the district, or other public events that you can attend. And then because we do have a Pact, there might be an opportunity for you to attend a local fundraiser. So I think this is where I really do emphasize here that keep in mind that Congress is going to go into recess at the end of this week. Because of the party conventions, they are going to be out of DC for 7 weeks. Now, next week, part of that is because of the Republican and Democratic National Convention. So the Republican National Convention is next week. The following week is the Democratic National Convention. So they won't necessarily be home that entire time, but they'll be home more than they would be. And so now you have this really ripe opportunity to meet with them back home. So as I mentioned, the most effective way is probably a lumberyard visit. So why is that? Well, they get to see your operation, meet your employees. It leaves a long-lasting impression. Like they get to put on the hard hat. They get to see the folks operating the forklifts. It's just, it's not, unless you live in it, it's not a business that you're probably familiar with. And so it's something completely new to them. The only issue is sometimes can be a scheduling challenge, which that's why making a scheduling request as early as possible helps. But I think most importantly, it helps get them on the radar. If you look at the picture on your screen now, that's Congressman Charles Bustani with Stein Lumber in Louisiana. That took place last year. If we just talking a little bit more about our lumberyard visits, there's a guide, as I mentioned earlier, on the Recess Action page at dealer.org. If you are successful in scheduling a lumberyard visit, please let NLBMDA know, and then also be sure to let your state or regional executives know. And then finally, as you can see this picture with Chris Yenrick and the Congresswoman Virginia Fox of North Carolina, hey, take a picture or 5, and then make sure you share them, obviously, with NLBMDA, but also share them with your regional executive. It's an easy way of creating some publicity for yourself. You can put, if your business is on Facebook, you can post the pictures on Facebook. It's just there are different ways, and that's all covered in the in the guide. But really making sure that you're able to publicize it. There's a sample press release in there as well. You don't have to do that, but it's another way, as much as possible, to sort of increase awareness of the visit. So So another way, so let's just say, for whatever reason, a lumberyard visit isn't in the cards. Lawmakers and their staff are always willing to meet with you in their district or state offices. The benefit for you is there's more flexibility with scheduling. The one thing I would keep in mind is there are some offices, especially in more rural districts, certain offices are open certain days of the week and not every day of the week. So just, you might want to pay attention to that. But another benefit is you can bring a group of dealers or a group of employees to a meeting potentially. So as we say, there's strength in numbers. It's not just you who cares about this issue. Hey, there's 3 other folks like me who care about this issue.
Ben, just to interrupt, we have a question about August recesses and whether or not you would recommend inviting your local newspaper or radio station, or other rules, or what do you think about
so
inviting your media to your?
If you want to do so if you want to do a press advisory, and I'm happy to help anybody with that, you can send that out. Now look, August can be a slow month, so I think especially for obviously we think about TV and things like that, but think about it this way: even if you do a press advisory and nobody shows up, and then you put out a press release about the successful visit you had, what it does is, if I'm a weekly newspaper and I'm short-staffed, I might just run that press release, okay? And so I know sometimes here in Washington we don't think that much about your weekly newspaper, but I can tell you in my case, it comes to my yard every Friday, and I might be more likely to notice, oh, I didn't realize that Bob's Lumber met with my member of Congress versus versus the Washington Post or something like that, which I don't have a subscription to.
And it's a great opportunity to add publicity for your business.
Yeah, right. No, I think that's another point. In addition to being able to advocate on the issues, it is a very easy way to increase awareness of your company and what you do, which is, sell lumber, sell building materials, help build communities.
I think on the press release, all of that, you certainly can do it, to answer your question. I think not a bad protocol would be to coordinate with the member's office, local office, that they may want to do that themselves, or they may have a reason why, hey, let's don't. But I think some coordination, since they're
with the state.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. Right. With that, but also the member's office. Yep. Just that level of coordination, I think, would be a great sort of thing to do.
And then, real quick, another question is, when is the best time to send that invitation out? And basically, it's now.
I would do it now. So it depends on the way. So offices are sometimes structured a little differently. Sometimes it's one person doing the scheduling. But usually they have 2 schedulers. So they usually have a DC scheduler, and they have a district or state scheduler. So you're going to want to find out who that scheduler is, and then just send them the information. Sometimes they have a standard scheduling request form through their website, and you can just do that and type it in. And then usually what I would do in those cases is then still call and ask for the scheduler, just so you have their email address. Say, hey, I just filled out the scheduling request on your website, but I also wanted to send this to you.
Yeah, and I would say absolutely follow up.
Mm-hmm.
You never know what's going to happen, and you never know if they receive your request, especially if it's going through their website. You always follow up and confirm that they have it and they're reviewing it. But how do they figure out who the district scheduler is?
You just call and ask to speak to the scheduler. That it's as simple as that. And trust me, every office has a scheduler. It's not like one of those things where, hey, do we have somebody who handles transportation issues? It's everybody has a scheduler.
And we're getting close to the end here, so 5 minutes. I think you're going to get it into a second, but just to get to this one question just came in. When is it okay to hand a check, a contribution to the
so the only place you really can't do it is at an official office. So you couldn't say go to the Hill and hand it to their congressional office, nor can you do it back in a district office, because that's federal property and you cannot do that.
So the prime time to really do it that benefits everyone would be during these yard visits, right?
Correct. So at the yard is the best time to do it, right? And obviously, if there is a check involved, there's a financial incentive, obviously, for the, hey, the member's time is worth something too. And if they know, hey, they can justify, hey, I'm going to do a photo op, I'm going to get to see this lumberyard, and I'm going to get some money for my campaign committee. Nobody's really going to argue with that.
And for whatever reason, maybe it's a scheduling conflict and you can't get that member of Congress to your yard, but you do want to participate and contribute personally to their campaign. What other methods or opportunities are there? Are there local events that you can do it at, or do you need to come here to DC and do it? Or
there are local events. They might be public. They might not be public. If you're having trouble finding a local fundraising event for a person you would like to financially support, I can put you in. Usually they have a fundraising consultant who has a list of all the fundraisers, and I'm happy to send that information on to you. Okay, so town halls. So these are those informal meetings that take place back in the state or district. So they're usually more intimate. So if you can't get them to come to your yard, it's not feasible to go to their district office, you can always go to a town hall. Those are usually held in the off years. You don't see as many in election years, but there are these mobile, sometimes they travel around the state and meet with folks, or they have other public events through their campaign, which is separate from their official office. So there are a variety of what, like they're going to festivals, they're attending, Rotary clubs, things like that. So those might be opportunities. So through a civic organization you're a part of, you might have an opportunity to meet with them as well.
Right. It's a touch point.
Right.
Of several touch points you want to develop. Absolutely.
And then, as we mentioned, some local fundraisers. NLBMDA has a political action committee called Blood Pact, which approves contributions for federal candidates. So if you're wondering if NLBMDA Blood Pact has money that approved for a member of Congress, feel free to contact me, and I can tell you whether we do, Blood Pact does or not. If we do and you want to go to something, just make sure we have to coordinate with your regional Blood Pact trustee and your Federated Association executive. So as I mentioned, Blood Pact is the political action committee of NLBMDA. All donations that come to Blood Pact are made by NLBMDA members through personal funds, and then decisions about who that money is given to are made by a board of trustees made up of NLBMDA members.
if a dealer wants the board of trustees to consider their member of Congress for whatever reason to contribute, what's the process?
So, yeah, well, they should do, but you can reach out to me, but you have to make a formal request with your regional trustees. So if you look at the slide we have on the screen, there are 5 regional trustees with a handy color map to give you an idea of which person covers which states. But those are the people, depending on what. So if you're in Florida, right, you need to contact Chuck Bankston. If there was somebody in Florida you wanted to take Blood Pact, should make a financial contribution to. And then the trustees periodically have a conference call or meeting. There's actually one at the end of the week where we go over things like this and add and remove people from the approved list. So lastly, it's just maintaining the relationship. So after your meeting, be sure to maintain the relationship you've worked hard to build. It's always easier to ask for something if you're already talking to them, as opposed to if you wait 2 years and then a piece of legislation comes up that you don't like very much, and they're going to ask, hey, well, where have you been the last 2 years? So making sure that we're maintaining the relationship. You can invite them to non-political events. So if your yard is having an anniversary and you're having a celebration, invite them to it. They might not come, but maybe they have a regional person or a district representative who can come in their place. And if you don't have time to meet in person, right, you can always pick up the phone ultimately and schedule a time to talk either to the lawmaker or their staff.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think a lot of people forget about that. It's if you have some kind of special event, that's a fantastic opportunity, right, to invite your members of Congress to your yard or to that particular event for your company, right?
Yes, and obviously lawmakers they're always looking for things that aren't overtly political that they can go to, where they can they can wave and they can shake hands and talk to folks without it being an official campaign appearance or official where they're officially campaigning for office. So we've kind of spent an hour going through everything. Again, if there is something that I failed to cover or you just have a question about after this call, feel free to reach out to me, ben@dealer.org, or phone number 202-367-2346. That's my direct line. You're not going to get a receptionist or anything. Come straight to me. But I'm happy to assist in any way I can to make this as easy as possible for everyone.
So just to add, I mean, the key action item right now is to go ahead and invite your member of Congress to your yard during the upcoming recess, which is, again, Ben, what's the time frame of the upcoming?
So, yeah, they're going to be out. Actually, the House's last day is probably Thursday, and then the Senate's last day is Friday. So they will be out, really even this weekend. But if you're thinking about the start of next week, July 18th through September 6th, which is that Tuesday, so through Labor Day. So if you made a request at the end of this week, maybe they're going to convention, then maybe they're going to, take a little time off, a few days off before they start campaigning in earnest. So that leaves the whole month of August to as an opportunity to meet with them, assuming that you're in town, and that it obviously sometimes it takes time to get on their schedule. So the earlier you ask, the more likely you are to get your request accepted.
So go ahead and pick up the phone and call your district office. If you have any questions or if you want Ben's assistance, he's more than happy to facilitate and provide you with additional guidance and coordinate also with our state and regional association executives as well. It's important to keep everybody in the loop. And again, if you do have a confirmed visit by a member of Congress, please let Ben know. And please take pictures. We want those pictures as well, and we'll make sure to pass them along again to your state or regional association as well. And I just want to thank everyone for your participation. Ben and Frank, thank you for everything that you do on a daily basis on behalf of the industry. You guys don't get enough credit, that's for sure. And just one last plug, I would just again encourage everyone to make sure you register for the Pro Dealer Industry Summit this fall. And thank you, and have a wonderful day. And I appreciate everything everyone does for the industry. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you all at upcoming events.